So the first thing you do is have your placket with the fold on the left hand side. Okay, you are going to put your zip, line it up at the top and just stitch your zip to your placket. You see the foot will just run and it will just hold it in place. The normal straight stitch. When you sew zips, the zip pulls get in the way. So you have your needle down, you lift your foot up, and then you can pull the zip pull out the way and continue sewing. Okay, where we displace this seam, we're now going to pin that up to the edge of the zip that you've just sewn to your placket. So you've got a single layer of placket and just that right hand side of the garment that you are going to, on that new folded edge, butt that up to your zip teeth. You're not covering them, you're butting it up to your zip teeth. Okay, now normally you will change to a zip foot, okay, but you don't have a zip foot. The zip foot allows you, this one, if I do that and then put the needle down, it hits the foot, so I have to move the needle position over to the left. But you can just do this for the demonstration, or you can sew it with a normal foot, it just might be a bit wobbly. So the zip foot has got this groove here, this cutout to allow for the teeth. So it just assists. So if you're doing it with a normal foot, it might just be a little bit wobbly, but you need to line up the centre line to the edge of where you're stitching. So you're going to do an edge stitch, and you start backwards and forwards, but pre-pin this all the way down, and at the bottom, keep this left hand side folded over to the right, so where you'd had that displaced pressed seam, you can continue to sew it past that opening. And then you do backwards and forwards, and you can see the zip foot, it's got that little cutout there, it just allows it to pass over. Now, manipulation of fabrics, if you're not working with calico, it's more difficult, which is why we like you to work with different fabrics, because you have to know how to manipulate them, work with them. You don't want to stretch your zip on, okay? You want to make sure it goes in nicely, and because of the way the zip teeth, the pull gets in the way, you get to a certain point, put the needle down, lift the foot up, and then you'll be able to pull it past. If you've got a slightly chunkier zip, you might need to lift the foot a little bit further behind you. It's a zip extension. Then put the foot down, and when you get to the bottom, make sure that left hand side of the zip is folded over, so you're only sewing the right hand side and that tiny little bit. You're just sewing past the opening, so past the gap. So you can see that's the gap. So now when I put that, it will line up with my original seam allowance, and the purpose is that it hides that row of stitching. That's why we press that seam displaced. So what we have is this is here and this is sewn up, and the placket you kind of need to move out the way because you don't want to sew through that placket. All right, but the left hand side, when it's sewn, needs to, the seam allowance folded back, match and be flat against that original fold line. So start from the bottom of the zip to do your pinning. All right, make sure it's flat and match it up to the original fold line. Hold it with maybe your right hand if you're right-handed, or left-handed, you should be ambidextrous. Fold that skirt over to the inside. Now you don't want the placket there, so you just want to make sure that it's just the left hand side of the zip tape. So you can kind of get that placket pushed out the way. So that's what I tend to do. I tend to just pin that placket over onto the right hand side just so I don't sew it. Alright, so just on the inside temporarily pin that placket out the way because you don't want to sew through that placket. Alright, so then what you do is you line your zip up from the bottom and make sure that that's nice, and then you can pin it. Now you'll be sewing last where the zip opening is. You'll be sewing across. So if you've got a metal tooth zip, make sure that you're not going to be sewing on that metal teeth or the end. Stop and put a pin in there. And then line up and just gradually, no stretch. And if you do this flat on a table, it's much easier. And when you put your pins in, you'll be able to feel the teeth of the zips. And you want to be sewing and pinning to the left-hand side of the zip teeth. And you do that all the way up, but make sure that folded opening goes in. Alright, matches the original line, so it's covering your stitch line that you've just sewn. And when you're pinning it, you're pinning right up to the teeth, but you're not pinning anything other than underneath. So you'll be sewing through the zip tape, the seam allowance, and the left-hand side of the skirt, or left hand to the zip, all the way up. We'll put this up. So I've pinned from the bottom up because then we get to the zip tape. These should match. Okay, we'll be able to sew pin so far, and then we need to move the zip pull out the way. So we pull it down, and then we can work out from what we've already pinned how far that seam allowance sits on the tape, and that bit there you can just put it like that displacement. You can see the gap there and just pin it in the same place. Now obviously when you use the zip foot, which you should all have at home, we do have them here in college, but you can sew it with your normal foot, but it just gets a bit wobbly. This time you will be putting it to the right hand side, so I need you, sometimes they slide across, I need to move my needle over position to the right hand side. So then when I put my zip foot down, it lines up so that the edge of the foot goes against the teeth of the zip. And it's all about feel. So you put that down and then you start sewing from the top. Sometimes I start a little bit down because this zip stop at the top zip stop, gets in the way. Sometimes they get in the way, so I tend to start in, reverse back, and then come forwards. And it depends, you might prefer sewing it open, like this, or you might prefer it with the zip done up. Now just remember that placket needs to be out the way. You mustn't sew through that placket or your zip won't open. And then you'll go into nicely, making sure you're securing it top and bottom. Sew that down all the way. Move your pins as you go. And because you're sewing against the zip teeth, it should give you a nice even stitch. And you sew across to the bottom. If you've got metal teeth zips, you'd have to stop here and go backwards and forwards, and then just do something by hand here, because you cannot sew across metal teeth zips. So again, pull it across, make sure that placket's out the way, and then just sew across. You just go up. Now with your placket, once you've taken that out of the machine, you should then be able to undo the placket, unpin it, flip it over so it lays flat, and then we don't like a flappy placket. Okay, so the bottom, just on the placket, we secure on the inside the zip tape to the bottom, and just so that a few stitches to hold just that zip against the placket. So it's like a bar tack, backwards and forwards. And then trim all your threads, make sure everything's nicely trimmed. And then what you have is your edge covering the stitches, and this is a lap zip which has got a placket, so you can see there, and it goes down and across at the bottom. You'd normally go right to the end, all right, and then your zip is semi-concealed, all right, and it's covered it up, and nice neat stitches. I've only done contrast stitching for the demonstration so you can see it, but you might want to do that if you were doing a denim style skirt. You can have contrast top stitching, and this is a lap zip with a zip guard or placket.